Hey, Limitless Minds family, welcome and thank you for joining us for another Limitless Live. Today is Wednesday, therefore, we are talking about Workplace Wednesdays. And we've got a great topic to discuss with you all today. We've got a great guest with us as well. But we're going to talk about, authenticity and being authentic in the workplace and being authentic in the workplace when you need to be assertive as well. And there is no one better that I would love to be able to do this live with than our newest member of our Limitless Lives Room Tilters, Mr. Hubert Payne. Welcome, Mr. Payne. Good to see you
What's
again.
up, Mike? How you doing, buddy?
All right, excellent, excellent. So those of you who don't know, Mr. Payne, Hubert has just joined us as one of the room tilters here at Limitless Lives. He's got a great background in doing some therapeutic work and performance with athletes, as well as being a professional musician and being part of the Little Big Town Country Band. So again, welcome, Hubert. Glad to have you, and excited to tackle this topic with you on a Wednesday.
Yeah, man. I'm excited to work this out with you, man. We've had some great conversations around it, and I'm excited about where it's going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think, one of the conversations that we had early on was that, we both kind of have this thing where we're very passionate about a couple of things, and we kind of have these two parallel career tracks,
Yeah.
right, that are centered around these passions. So for me, for both of us, it's the coaching side of it, right?
Mhm.
It's the performance coaching. It's working with athletes. It's working with business professionals, families, coaches, etc. But then the other side for me is also on the sales side. I've
Yeah.
been a career salesman within the healthcare industry for a number of years. You've also not been in sales, but as a professional musician and working in that realm, which I know nothing about. So
Mhm.
I think I sometimes have to hold back my groupie tendencies to try to ask you a whole bunch of questions about the industry and some of your experiences. But I guess my first question to you would be, where do you see that parallel? Do you sometimes find in those two workplace areas that they either bleed into each other? Do you find that you want them to kind of integrate with each other, or do you try to keep it separate?
Yeah. Well, man, the first thing is, around authenticity. What we're talking about is knowing, when you're hearing your voice and how to walk that out. And I found a lot of similarities in the music business, especially because music, like for example, being in Nashville, man, it's like the NFL of music for musicians. If you're a great player in Colorado or Nebraska, you move to Nashville to make it big, right? And there's always this push and pull of, man, who am I? What is my voice on my instrument? And what's acceptable in the community, right? Like, what's the standard for me to be able to get work? But at the same time, like, man, what am I bringing to the table? What makes me different? So I see that in music, and I also see it in the coaching world, right? There are all kinds of awesome motivators and awesome resources in the mental health space. But I find myself continually asking myself, man, what's my space in it? What's my voice, right? What's acceptable, right? What message can I touch as many people as I can with? And it's an interesting parallel, a lot of give and take, but lots of similarities. One thing that I do want to mention that's a huge part of what I find myself navigating is um, just because I'm really accomplished in one area, you know what I mean? It doesn't entitle success in another. And I find myself having to just put on another cloak of humility a lot of times and being like, man, I got to remain childlike and keep growing in this one area. Because just because I spent, 1,000 hours playing the drums doesn't mean that I spent 1,000 hours helping people navigate their stuff, right?
Excellent. Yeah. So it's that big kind of that taking a self inventory kind of
Yeah.
frequently, and
Yeah.
what I find myself doing also, and probably a lot of people do, depending on what your passions are and what your workplace life is that shifting, right? Is shifting
Mhm.
focus, going from doing one thing for 7 8 hours a day, and then being able to quickly shift your focus to doing something
Mhm.
else that's sometimes in a completely different realm. So there's sometimes there's that bleed over, right? And just like you said, where you might have 1,000 hours of practice in drumming, and you're able to, utilize that experience, but you question, when is it the right time to bring it
That's
into
right.
the coaching world? And you know what, I think I do too. I struggle with that sometimes as well, where I might have 10, 15 years of sales experience, and I'm able to identify maybe some areas or challenges or struggles that people are having, that I
Mhm.
can pull from my experience as a coach to kind of bring light to that, or create a solution, or help out create a solution or a strategy. But then I
Mhm.
have to go back and ask myself, is this the right time? Should we be
Right.
doing it now? You
Right.
know, I may have garnered respect and um, credibility in one field, but maybe not so much in this field. So
Right.
going back and forth with that and trying to decide when is the right time is really key. So
Yeah.
always want to pay attention to the chat. I see we've got Lane here today, so thank you for joining us, Lane. You said it's a exciting topic, absolutely a freaking discussion topic in your
Mhm.
coaching and transitioning veterans.
Mhm.
Shout out to all the veterans out there. We know that is a big part of our community, and we always want to make sure we're honoring and showing some um, due respect to the veterans, especially in
Absolutely. Absolutely.
the world. Um, so Hubert, have you experienced anything where you felt like your authenticity in the workplace, maybe you didn't show up, or
Mm.
maybe you've worked with people that you know them very well, and you know their authentic behavior and their authentic attitudes, but
Mhm.
maybe they didn't show up, or maybe they needed to be assertive, or they needed to do something different. But
Mhm.
the idea, not necessarily their own authentic self, but the idea of authenticity kind of gets in the way a little bit.
Yeah. So as recent as yesterday, I had a phone call. A lot of times, I work as a consultant and trying to put maybe two different companies together, and I love brainstorming and using my creativity. And I had this great model of a certain type of coach, and I was pitching it to a company, and and I made my delivery, I made my pitch. It felt real and authentic to me, and initially, she responded with, "Hey, Hubert, I don't feel comfortable with you representing us in this way right now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I love your idea. I'm not saying no forever, but for right now, that doesn't line up with my mission, and I'm going to ask that you just do that thing on your own without us for now."
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself giving all the normal pleasantries to make somebody feel like you understand the community. Oh yeah, totally makes sense. Yep. And then I noticed quickly after I hung up the phone, man, it was like I walked on a landmine, and my emotions just were exploding, and I started getting all this anxiety and all these crazy messages of, man, maybe it wasn't a good idea. What does that mean about me and my coaching? And I started making it really personal, right? And and it was more of a situation where I felt like my authenticity was rejected.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like it was rejected, and it brought up a lot of emotion in me. And now I can look back and say, I'm grateful for that moment because it encouraged me to kind of really do my own work. And we'll talk about that moving forward. Like, what is the process of when your authenticity just gets rejected or blown up, right? How do you move from that rejection to maybe that's just feedback, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in my story yesterday, I took that blow, and man, I pulled it back together, and we'll get into more of the technique a little later on. But in the story, you know, my authenticity wasn't accepted, and I
Right.
had to make a decision this morning when I woke up to still stand on it. Right?
Right.
It may be for someone else, a different partner. It
Mm-hmm.
may be that I need to tweak some things. But what I can't do is take it personal. What I can't do is blunt the voice of my authenticity and just fit inside other people's boxes completely,
Right.
right? There
Right.
has to be some agreeableness, but I'm choosing to stand in my authenticity, but make adjustments.
Yes. Excellent. Excellent. And authenticity now, it's a word that's probably been used so much now over the last several years because the world has changed, right? We've
Mhm.
gone through a pandemic. People are forced to stay at home and do this type of virtual interaction.
Yep.
And I think probably early on, people were kind of like, oh, well, I've got to be on camera and I've got to make sure
Mhm.
everything around me is nice and neat and there's no kids coming into my room, into my
Right.
space, or
Right.
my phone's not ringing or anything. But then people started to realize, like, okay, that's not really authentic, and there's been this resurgence or
Yeah. Yeah.
acceptance of people being authentic
Mhm.
and being accepting of it. And I think it's really a great thing. Nevertheless, there's always a time and a place, and we've got to sometimes shift our focus or change or be aware of when is it best to be authentic in the workplace and
Yeah.
how should that show up.
Yeah.
Um, Thank you. Some great comments in here. We've
Yeah.
got Jenny saying, "Yes, be yourself. Everyone else is
That's
already."
right. That's
Oscar,
right.
great quote. Um, Being vulnerable. Thank you again, Jenny. Jenny also says, "Good example. The desire to win challenges, our authentic self, and she's found it tough not to take it personally." And,
Mm.
and Hubert, you really hit that on the head because I think as human beings, as people that want to strive and want to perform and want to do good or do very, very well for ourselves, we can sometimes be our absolute worst critic
Yeah, we
and
can.
kind of come down on ourselves
Yep.
and not take the time to kind of separate our emotions from our thoughts and
Yep.
being able to decipher, okay, which is the driving force here? Is it the emotion or is it the thought? At Limitless Minds a lot, we talk about what's the next right step, right?
Yeah. Love that.
Using that time to be neutral in a moment of time when you're not too sure, where there's
Mhm.
uncertainty, and then beginning to choose, well, what's the right next step? So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I, I had I'm sorry, go ahead. Were you going
Yeah.
to?
On that note, a lot of times I find with myself and the people I'm working with, when we face that rubber meets the road of confliction, right? We got a decision, and I call it either we're gonna go in like reconnaissance, recon mode. We're gonna find the enemy, and a lot of we stay in the victim place. Well, you should accept my idea, or
Yes.
who did me wrong for me to feel all these emotions,
Right.
or we can choose to go resourceful, right? So instead of recon, choose using your creativity to be resourceful. Man, what skills can I add? If I
Mhm.
went back to the drawing board with that feedback, how can I make my idea better? How can I build up what I'm presenting? Maybe it's a thing of patience, right?
Mhm.
So we use our creativity not to find the enemy and go into recon mode, but to find that next right step, like you're saying, and engage curiosity and resourcefulness.
Yeah, absolutely. Your story actually reminded me of a coaching story that I recently had and came across. So I'm working with an individual, and he says to me, I am really tired of people um, either being dismissive of my ideas or taking my ideas and calling them their own. And he
Hmm.
said, and it creates this visceral feeling inside of me, and I'm
Hmm.
not quite sure how to deal with it. Right in that moment, it's visceral and it's authentic, and
Right.
that's what I want to say, and that's how I want to come across. But I'm also aware that, hey, this is a workplace setting, and maybe for my own longevity of being here, I probably don't want to give a visceral, authentic approach, right?
That's right.
So my suggestion to him was, you know, being in that space, and he was kind of referring specifically to, he was on this large conference call. He put together a suggestion or idea. It was dismissed by some other people, and then later on, somebody came up with the same idea, just worded it a little bit
Yeah.
differently.
Hmm.
And my suggestion was, you know what? In situations like that, sometimes it takes this courageous leadership, right?
Yeah.
Courageous leadership for somebody else to step in, because if you're on a large conference call, chances are somebody heard and recognized what you said and also recognized that somebody else came up with a similar idea.
Hmm.
But it takes that courageousness for somebody to come back to it and say, hey, you know what? That's exactly what Joey had pointed to, previously
Hmm.
a couple of minutes ago. Let's take that idea and how can we expand on that, right? So that's one thing. But if you're amongst people where maybe that courageous leadership hasn't been cultivated yet, or
Yeah.
hasn't been developed, then one of the other things is, just like we were saying, right, taking that internal inventory and looking at the feedback for yourself and asking, well, if there isn't anyone on my team just yet who's courageous enough to help me get my point across, then what is it that I need to do to make sure that the people on my team are on board with me and
Yeah.
support, and that I'm supporting them as well, so that I don't have to
Love
have
that.
this visceral feeling when I feel like, an idea is being dismissed, or an idea is being recreated in some other person's shape or fashion, and
Mhm.
they're saying the exact same thing that they said. So
Yeah.
I thought that was um, an interesting challenge that people have experienced, and I think I've probably experienced that too, as
Yeah.
well in my career. Anything that you would say to that? Anything in
Yeah,
addition?
I love the responsibility I hear in that process. Like, man, what can I do? I love that. I would also like to add, when we're talking about authenticity, it's a great opportunity for us to, when we're faced with that fracture between trying to be agreeable and our authentic voice, it's a great time to revisit the mission, right?
Mhm,
What's the mission around what I'm doing and why am I doing it, right?
mhm,
If the mission is I want this company to be better, and you come up with an idea and someone else repeats it and then it's taken, does the ball still move down the field if we do it?
mhm,
Yes. My box is checked on my mission, right?
right.
There's been so many times, if anyone's familiar with country music, man, I've been in a room, like, for example, Little Big Town's got a song called Wine, Beer, Whiskey, multi-million downloads. And we've made music with Pharrell Williams and in the studio with all these amazing producers and musicians for the last 8 years. And there's been so many times where maybe I presented an idea, and then at 10 o'clock in the morning, by 6 o'clock in the afternoon, we're right back at square one because someone else in the band presented it. You know what I mean? And I
Yeah.
got to make a decision of, man, how am I going to receive that? Number one, I am going to allow myself to feel the emotions. No need to suppress, right? Because there's no win in suppressing. But I should say, and I can lean into, well, what's my mission? And my mission with Little Big Town is to help make their music the best I can from my position, right? So
Mhm,
whether my idea is being heard or not, I wouldn't be there if they didn't value me, right? And in my mission is still intact if we make a great song,
right.
right? I
Right.
still get to go tour that song. My name is still on. It doesn't say on the credits. Hubert came up with the drum groove and that one chord progression that changed and that stop in the middle of the second chorus.
Uh-huh.
That's not there, right? So I really, when we're talking about authenticity, it's also important to be aware of where the ego is. And the ego is not all bad, but
Mhm,
are we leading with it, right? Are we confusing ego with authenticity, right?
right.
Or and in the situation, where does the mission play, right? So it's like those three things, and figuring out which one are we prioritizing.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds very likely that some of those might take priority over others given different situations. So
Mhm.
it sounds like, being able to keep things in perspective, like you said, you know, maybe my idea the first time I presented it wasn't accepted, or
Right.
wasn't um, put into the work for the next show, etc. But the bigger question is, did it eventually? And okay, maybe it didn't come from me, but the bigger question is, are we moving the ball down the field?
Hmm.
Are we getting closer to where we want to get close to?
Hmm.
You have that ability to put it in perspective. That makes it a whole lot easier for you
That's
to
right.
move forward and not take that personal, not take certain things so personal.
Hmm.
So I want to be able to get to just some suggestions that we came up with. Mari, if you could put those three suggestions on there. So thank you. Um, oh, no, this is from Lane. Lane also said, also powered. Yes, don't confuse ego with authenticity. Ego is such a slippery slope.
Yes.
Lane, you are coming up with some really great ones here. Also,
Yes.
you said, be me, but be better.
Yeah.
Absolute
Oh,
power move.
love
Yes,
that. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, so yeah, so we've got 3 steps, right? 3 steps that we think everyone can begin to utilize in practicing authenticity in their workplace, and being able to deal with the different challenges that come with the workplace. And the very first one, just creating that self awareness. You want to take that one, Hubert?
Yeah. So we mentioned it earlier. When it comes to creating self awareness, and if we go back to the original story that I shared, I had to have the awareness to say, this feels like rejection, but I want to move it into feedback. And the way that we do that is we chunk it down, right? So a lot of times when we're in a trauma response or a defensive posture, we feel attacked and everything seems bad, right? We're taking that feedback personal, and you're thinking about, am I a bad person? Can I do this job? But if we chunk it down and get as specific as we can about the feedback or what we heard, it goes from rejection to feedback, right? So for me, if I'm honest, the way that I presented my idea, um, I presented too many options, right? So I
Mhm.
chunked it down from, she doesn't like me, I'm not good enough, to, I gave too many options, and I let my creativity run a little rogue,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And by me chunking it down and getting really specific about what emotions are coming up and why I'm feeling that way, um, I got some power back, right? I
Mhm.
got some confidence back.
Mhm.
So the self awareness helped me to make it a really specific step. Okay, next time I present that idea, I
Mhm.
need to like just land a plane. I
Mhm.
need to be more specific. Um, and furthermore, I know more where she stands, right? Because I
Right,
don't feel so defensive. I can actually listen and take it all in.
right.
So to use your self awareness to go from rejection to just feedback, which makes you better, chunk it down into the smallest morsel you can, right? And then activate your creativity and resourcefulness on that.
Excellent. I couldn't agree more. And that essentially becomes a skill set, right?
That's right.
The more self-awareness you have, the more you practice that process of chunking it down. You know, I come from a hip hop culture, so we used to say things like breaking it down to the very last compound,
That's
right?
right. That's right. That's right. That's good.
So we want to break it down to the very last compound, so we get to the very specifics of what it is that is causing us to have this emotion or feeling, and then deciding, is it warranted or is it not, and then what's the next right step. So
Mhm.
excellent, excellent. Mari, could you put up the second one we got coming up here? Yes, so understanding your workplace norms. This is huge because,
Mhm.
like we said earlier, in this new world that we're in now of doing so many calls virtually, and conference calls, and not necessarily having so much one-to-one face-to-face interaction, sometimes those lines of what the workplace norms are can be blurry, can be
Yeah.
blurred, or gray. And people sometimes can feel like uh, there's a huge amount of comfort, right, in their workplace, but it may not be the case because prior to the pandemic, there were cultural norms and customs and things that happened in the culture that necessarily haven't really changed, but they've just kind of been maybe pushed to the side a little bit because of this
Mhm.
new way of communicating with people on a day-to-day basis. So it's super important to know what those norms are, know what the culture is in the workplace that you have. Are you in a workplace where it's a very buttoned up academic
Mhm.
culture, where maybe sharing personal things or intimate stories about yourself is not necessarily acceptable?
Right.
Or is it in a very relaxed, easygoing, where people want to see your kids and they want to hear the baby crying in the background and they want to hear the dog, and then the conversations go from, well, we were trying to get this RFP, but the next thing you know, we're really comfortable with talking about everybody's dog, right?
Right. Right. Right.
So what are those norms, what are those cultures, what are those
Yeah.
practices, and being aware of it so that you can then decide, okay, where is my best authentic self going to be welcomed in this workplace setting? And then the third one, as we close it out here, is telling genuine stories. Absolutely, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it again in this type of workspace where you're doing things virtually, telling stories and sharing what happened to you over the weekend, or sharing what happened to you at a particular event, or maybe a trade show or a work event or something, and not embellishing it, right? Not
Mhm.
exaggerating, because people can pick up on that, right? So we want to make sure that if you're telling a story, you're telling something genuine. And you're almost, sometimes, if it's an opportunity to express vulnerability for yourself, right? That's a great way to begin to strengthen the relationships that you have, right?
Yeah.
We don't always necessarily want to win people over that we work with, but what we do want to do is strengthen the relationships that we have. And one of those ways is being able to tell those authentic stories, being able to tell those intimate stories, telling those
Yeah.
stories where you've failed and you've had to overcome something, um, and expressing your vulnerability in that space is a great way to make sure that you're telling those genuine stories. So, we've got a couple more comments here. Looks like Lane says, "I see this fueling how to get to empathy in the EQ model on yesterday's live." Okay, that was your live yesterday
Yeah.
that I think she's referring to. Okay. Win or learn, another great example, Hubert. Yes, yes. Lane, thank you so much for being a part of this. I
Yeah.
think, I try to log in and catch the all the lives, but I am pretty sure that almost every one that I have been on, I've seen some participation from Lane,
That's
and
awesome.
usually Sean too. We don't see Sean today, but thank you, Lane, for your contributions here and adding to the conversation. Hubert, I'll leave it to you to close it out. We got about a minute left here. Any last words you'd like to say for Workplace Wednesday?
Yeah, first off, man, awesome conversation. I feel like it was 3 minutes long. I enjoyed you, Mike. I do want to share, man. You ended up with telling genuine stories, and I think even a step before that, it's important that we understand what genuine stories we're telling with the relationship with ourselves, right?
Mhm.
That's going to be super important, because if we're not in our internal environment understanding what stories are genuine or what stories may be someone else's story, like that's abandoning our authenticity, right? And
Absolutely.
we can't tell genuine stories if they don't start with the relationship between me and me, right? So this is an awesome opportunity, I think, for all of us. I'm gonna continue to do it. I want to make sure I understand, man. If I'm feeling a certain emotion, I want to honor that. I want to sit with it. I don't necessarily want to see from it. I heard my man Colin say, "See through those emotions," and make sure that you have healthy stories going on in your environment. And if you don't, that's where your work is. Engage your
Mhm.
curiosity. Reach out for help on that, because it's super important how you show up.
Yes, absolutely. Well said. I could not agree with you more. And in being able to, the term you used was, you said being okay, me being okay with me.
That's right.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely. Right. So taking that self inventory and always asking yourself those right questions. So
Mhm.
thank you, everybody, for joining us again for another Limitless Live Workplace Wednesdays. Please tune in tomorrow for Thriving Thursdays, and Friends and Family on Friday. And Hubert, I think you and I are together next week as well.
Yes,
So
sir. Yes, sir.
check in on the 27th.
Thanks, Mike.
Take care. Thank you.